And so it's my pleasure to introduce Father Tom Kearney. And again, the title is The Spirituality of Serving Others. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. It's my honor and privilege to be able to speak to you about volunteering as a Christian ministry. A little bit about my own involvement and how it happened. I moved to Sarasota in 1995 from Connecticut and enjoyed retirement for about a month, and then said, well, I've got to do something. Keep myself busy. And also I really missed the opportunity to be with and serve and minister to other people. During my priesthood assignments, mostly in southern New Jersey, I found myself in rural and tourist areas. And these areas had, at the time, that primitive emergency medical services model of volunteer ambulance and volunteer EMS. So I found myself with some time off, 2 days a week off, and make a long story short, I began to study for the Volunteer Ambulance Corps in my parish. And at that time, the training was called Medical Response Technician. It was very basic first aid. But eventually, over the years, that led me to take a formal emergency medical technician course, and then a few years later, a nationally registered paramedic course. So when I retired to Sarasota in 1995, I found myself at Sarasota Memorial Hospital being interviewed for a position as paramedic in the emergency care department, the emergency room. I almost took the job, except that, like any medical job, it involved a lot of shift work and working days and working nights. Having just retired, it was, well, I really don't think I wanted to do that. But I was really impressed with Sarasota Memorial and everything I had seen. And one of our wonderful parishioners, Stacy Scott Bertreau. Stacy was the head of the volunteer program at Sarasota Memorial. And pretty soon, after talking with Stacy, I found myself a volunteer in the hospital's dispatch center. This year would be my 28th year at Sarasota Memorial volunteering, and I'm as happy as ever. Still do the same thing in the volunteer dispatch office, which is kind of like a go for air and control center. Get this, get that, go here, go there, do this, do that. A lot of patient contact, which I like. Over the years, many people have asked me, why do you volunteer 3 days a week at the hospital? You get no pay. You've been there for years and years, never got a paycheck. Some say, you're crazy to do that. So I do it. And I hope this touches on the ministry part of our conversation. I think when you volunteer, that your motivation and your motivation and what you're really looking for in that work is extremely important. So why do I volunteer? Certainly it affords me the opportunity to get out of the house, to be busy, to do something. But if you look hard enough, you can always find something to do, something to occupy you, to volunteer. And so I continue to go to Sarasota Memorial as a volunteer because it reminds me of my own humanity, my own mortality. It makes me grateful every single day I'm there for my present health. Pray God it continues. My volunteer work expresses my belief in the unicity and connectedness of all people. I do believe that I am my brother's keeper and also his and her caregiver. It offers an opportunity for priestly ministry, both of the ordained type and even more fundamentally of the priestly ministry of all of us who are baptized into Christ. the priesthood of the Lord of the faithful. And you know, I do it because I take the message of Jesus in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 25, very seriously. Jesus was talking to a group of people. He had great praise for some, and he had a stern warning for others. He spoke of those who care for the sick, visit the infirm or the imprisoned, who take care of the orphan and the widow, who provide spiritual and physical aid to people who are in distress. He blessed those people. And I do my volunteer work because it's a blessing to me, an honor and a privilege to have an actual, concrete, personal opportunity to visit the shut-in, to feed the hungry, to hopefully bring a caring touch or smile, a word to those who are fearful and depressed, and sometimes people who are losing hope. As I said, I think our motivation in doing anything in life is extremely important. So there's a little prayer that I say every day when I enter Sarasota Memorial to do my volunteer work, and I like to read it to you. It's very short. It says, Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, bless, I pray, my work today in this hospital. Grant that I may bring comfort and hope to all who suffer in body and mind through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. I'm very happy to say that in this volunteer work, I'm joined by some wonderful parishioners from St. Boniface. We have David, and Father Ernie, and Bill, and Lisa Wolf, and myself. We're all represented, 5 volunteers. Okay, that's how I got here, and I'm ready to answer questions if you have any.
There we go. Thank you, Tom. I guess I'll bring up the first question and wait for people to now be able to raise their hands. What's been the biggest challenge to you as a volunteer at the hospital?
A big challenge is being careful not to proselytize people and not to cross the line, you know, in regard to the duties and the behavior, the code of conduct that the hospital wants you to follow. And sometimes as a priest, it's difficult, you know, not to jump into that spiritual realm when you can often see a real need for it. I handle that by maybe making a delicate suggestion that they see the hospital chaplain, you know, and explain that there are 3 chaplains available and that they would be at their beck and call and happy to serve them.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
And so some questions or thoughts that you want to share. And if you'd use the Zoom app for raising your hand, and we have Betsy. Go ahead, Betsy.
Hey, Tom, thank you. I did not realize you volunteered 3 days a week there. And it was neat when we had a recent hospital visit that you popped in to see us. That was great. I'm curious, what led you to take the route you're following right now when volunteering at the hospital and not be on as a chaplain, or is that not a volunteer role? Yeah. It just seems so up your alley.
Well, the hospital, number one, does not have volunteer chaplains. They did in the past, and they didn't have a great history with that. So they have professionally trained chaplains there. When I began in 1995 at SMH, I also volunteered at the same time at hospice on Clark Road. I did do volunteer chaplaincy work for hospice. Again, over several years, they had a lot of bad experiences with volunteer chaplains, not well educated, not well prepared, people who were proselytizing patients, and hospice phased out the volunteer chaplain program and train their own people in the clinical pastoral education parts that John mentioned. My interest in medicine goes way back. When I was a little kid, I had a very beloved uncle, my Uncle Donald. And Uncle Donald was part owner of a professional ambulance service that was, in fact, the oldest one in New England. It was way back to the horse and buggy days. And as a kid, I used to love to hang out in the garage, and check out the ambulances and the equipment. So when I found myself in parishes in South Jersey that needed people to staff the volunteer ambulance corps, it was kind of like a natural thing for me to do. And then as they began to offer more and more medical training, I really got into it. I really enjoyed it. I always say that national paramedic course I took was the most difficult course I ever took in all my years in school. So I love medicine, and I love this. I still study medicine a great deal.
Thank you, Tom. And Mike, you have your hand raised. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, thank you, Brother John. Father Tom, do you ever get up a day and just don't feel like going in? And how do you motivate yourself to do that? Or you say something else has come on and really think that's important that I do this, but of course, it's a question of priority. How do you overcome that?
Well, I find volunteering at the hospital one of my greatest sources of joy and contentment. So it's difficult for me to give up a day. Normally, I would be there this morning from 8 to 12. You meet a great group of people, and you meet people from all over the world at Sarasota Memorial. It's such a great hospital. And I have met people from all over the world, patients and visitors. And so I really enjoy going, and I don't find it difficult to go there. I miss it when I'm not there.
All right. And thank you, Tom. Rick, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Tom. And thank you, Brother John.
Mhm.
Tom, you talked about how you got there, and you didn't say much about what value maybe your patients get, but what value I always found it when I volunteered that I got way more value than I put into it. And do you find that to be true in your work?
Yes, absolutely. Yep, I do. Just the other day, I met a lady in the hallway, and I could tell she was disoriented and she didn't know where she was going. She was looking for the radiology department. And I said, come on, I'll take you there. And I walked her over there. And the poor woman broke down in tears when we got there. She was so grateful that somebody, reached out to her and walked her over where she had to go. I guess she had a relative who was injured and was in the ER getting x-rays and CAT scans. And it made a huge difference to her. And the simple thing just to show her where her radiology was. So yes, exactly. You get a lot of feedback from the patients. And I love it when I'm out and about in the community, maybe at Publix or someplace, and somebody will say, don't you volunteer at the hospital? And say, yes. And say, well, you put me in a wheelchair one time and you pushed me up to endoscopy. It's amazing that they would remember.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Betsy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, Tom, how many other areas in the hospital are there volunteer opportunities?
Well, there's almost every department and every floor in the hospital has volunteers. A lot of volunteers have no patient contact. My very first job volunteering at the hospital was in the operating room. It was in their own particular storeroom, which was in the middle of the surgical suite. And in there you had all the trays and instruments that would be used in the next day's surgeries. So my job was I'd go in and I'd get a list of surgeries for the next day and what room they were going to be in, what trays were needed. I would pull those instrument trays and bring them into that room, put them there for the next day. It was very interesting. They also have the biologics in there, the things like transplantable tissues and organs, and bones and all the stuff that they could do that kind of work with. I was in there alone, so it was a long 4 or 5 hours, and it was also very, very cold. I don't do cold very well. So I lasted there about 6 months and I couldn't take the cold anymore. So that I transferred to another department. But yes, there's people who simply help with administrative work. There are people who just sit and read the patients. There are people like myself who work in the dispatch center, which is very busy. In a 4-hour shift, you're probably going to walk about 3 to 5 miles, depending on how busy the day is. Father Ernie, for example, he works in surgery transport, which is a difficult job. You go get patients and you go to the room and you get them in the stretcher and you take them to the OR, or you take them from the OR back to their room. You take them from short-term surgery to discharge. There's people who work in the NICU, newborn intensive care unit. People who work in the oncology building. Almost every kind of job you could think of. People bring their doggies in, pet therapies. People who play the piano and music for the visitors. In fact, there's a woman from Church of the Redeemer who comes in every week, couple of days a week, and she plays that beautiful piano in the lobby for an hour or so. And it's really awesome, really cool. So they have all kinds of volunteer opportunities. Every month they publish a list of opportunities and openings they have. Most of the time they're pretty full. And sometimes it's difficult to get a position as a volunteer because they are full. And the hospital has to spend money to bring on a volunteer. You have to have a background check, have to have a TB check, and I guess an NCIC, National Crime Information Base, make sure, no arrests, stuff like that. So, yeah, it depends. It depends on the time of the year. For example, I know at the new hospital in Venice, they're full. They're not taking any volunteers and they have a long waiting list.
Right, thank you, Tom.
Welcome.
Michael, you have your hand up. Well, Amy's got her hand waving. Let's take Amy first and then.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, I'm not sure it was really waving, but I had clicked it a few times and then it disappeared. I wanted to thank Tom for the time he came to visit me after I had my hip replacement surgery. That was 3 years ago. And I was just delighted to see him. And we already knew each other, not only from church with saying hi, but also at the Y. We used to see each other at the Y all the time. I was part of a brand new volunteer situation in Poughkeepsie, New York, where we were starting a volunteer program in the emergency room. That was one place that there typically were not volunteers. And it was really interesting because I do not like the sight of blood and things like that. But I found that it was very helpful for people just to have somebody sit beside them, somebody who was alone. So I would hold their hand, and try to quiet them down, because lots of times you're all by yourself in that little cubicle in the emergency room. And while they had their stitches or something, I'd look at the wall. I wouldn't get into anything terribly medical. But that was an interesting situation. And I had not really thought about that for a long time because we've been down here for so long. But I wondered if you have volunteers in the emergency room here.
We do, Amy, and it's interesting what you say. It's one of the most, I think, beneficial volunteer posts, because as you say,
If you're all alone.
Yeah, they'll come in with their relative and then they'll scoot them off to the CT scanner or MRI, and they're gone for an hour or so. And the relative's sitting in the room all worried and upset and anxious. And yeah, so the volunteer can take them for a cup of coffee, take them outside to the courtyard, just sit and talk with them, help them be distracted as they wait for them to come back, So yeah, it's really important. They're pretty fussy about who they hire for the ER,
Mm.
because you know, the ER is a crazy place.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I had one unfortunate experience because I was just going kind of from room to room to see who needed help. And I went into one room and the lady was dead. And that was a whole different situation. They had neglected to tell me. And the nurses knew it, but that was a bit of a shocker. But I think it was very, very useful because there are a lot of times scared people who come in if they've cut
Oh,
themselves or
absolutely.
broken something, and they just need somebody to sit with them and help them relax and just to know somebody cares.
You know, in my priesthood assignments, whatever parish I was in, if there was a hospital in the area, I became the chaplain because usually I was the only priest that spoke Spanish and Italian, and I was in South Jersey. And we had a very large Spanish-speaking community who worked in those huge farms in South Jersey, picking the crops. And we had a large Italian community who worked at the Owens, Illinois glass factory in Bridgeton, New Jersey. Corning Glass was there too, I think. I had a lot of Italian people there. So I always got the job of the hospital chaplain, but that was okay. I enjoyed it.
Good. All right, thank you. Michael.
My better half has
Rita.
the floor.
Hello, Rita.
I'm not on the floor, I'm on the chair. First of all, thank you, Tom, for saying yes to doing this.
You're welcome.
I know that being in the spotlight is not a position you like at all. And so I'm really grateful that you said yes to sharing.
Thank you.
And I've been the benefit for the rest of you of Tom's ministry at the hospital a number of times as a result of my partner having a lot of experience at Sarasota Memorial. And so usually Tom stops by and checks in on me and prays with me and has just been there. But Tom, Sarasota is not the only place that you serve people. And maybe you might want to share. I know, again, that's not what you like to do, but many times I hear of somebody who needed a ride and it was Tom Kearney who did that, or somebody who just needed somebody to sit with them, not in the hospital, and Tom Kearney did that. So you're a first responder, meaning that it's not just a crisis. When you see or hear somebody in need, you're one of the first people that asks what you could do. So could you talk a little bit about those other areas of service that you have?
Okay. The other one that I really enjoy, and it's relatively new, maybe the last 6 months, is helping Father Everett Walk from from St. Boniface. Father Ev works at the food pantry at St. Wilfrid's on Wilkinson Road. They have a food pantry every Friday from 1 to 3. And they get a lot of people to come there. They had no one who spoke Spanish. And Father Ev was telling me how upset the staff was because these newly arrived Spanish-speaking people would come to the food pantry. It's a USDA pantry, government run. So there's forms they have to fill out in the beginning. They have to register and fill out forms, and they have to show that they qualify, typical government bureaucracy. So these Spanish folks would show up and nobody spoke Spanish and they couldn't get them to fill out the forms and they'd leave, no food, they'd get upset and leave. So Father Rev asked me if I would help them and I said, yes, I would. Well, you know what happens. Once you go once or twice, you're there. So I go there on Fridays from 1 to 3 and it's really wonderful. I've met people from all over the world, mostly from South America, but recently we've had a lot of Ukrainian people come. We were able to get the forms and the documents that they need in Ukrainian or Russian for them, so they could fill them out. I was there yesterday and we had 135 people in 2 hours. and their extended family. So like when Jose comes and gets his food, we know that there's 4 people in his household. So the extended number of people was over 500. And of course, every week we've seen more and more people come because, you know, things are more and more difficult. Things are more and more expensive. I was shocked. I've seen some hospital volunteers show up to get food. We had a couple of city employees, county employees show up. One was a policeman who has 5 people in his family that he's supporting. And he needed extra food. So it's good. I like the people who say Wilfred. They're very friendly, like all Episcopalians are. And it's been very rewarding to me. Just fascinating how to meet these people from everywhere. So I think, Rita, that's the other most important part of some volunteer work I do.
All right, thank you, Tom.
Welcome.
Anyone else? While we're waiting, Betsy's got her hand up. Okay, Betsy.
Oh, Grace, did you have your hand up? You're muted. I've already spoken
Yeah,
once.
Grace.
I'll give you my slot.
Okay, Tom, I just wanted to ask a quick question about that, and I got in a little late here, but I can always watch you on the taped version too. Where does the food come from at St. Wilfrid's? I know Boniface does, well, maybe a couple of times a year, we do it for the All Faiths Food Pantry, and that is distributed to different areas, different people. Where does St. Wilfrid's get their food, and should we be personally dropping food off to them? Do they have a food pantry, as does, if they do, Church of the Palms, and they have a big sign up, and when they say they have a food pantry and would welcome donations.
Right. So Grace, ours is USDA Department of Agriculture, and the food comes from the USDA through All Faiths. All Faiths delivers the food. The difference between ours and like the Church of the Palms is that they can come to our food pantry once every 4 weeks, where Palms, I think they can go every day if they want. But they like ours better because it's a huge room with all these stores of food. They can shop and pick what they want. They're not handed a bag and say, here, take it home now. So they can shop and get what they want. And they have everything there. They have produce, they have meat, they have canned goods, dry foods, everything you could think of. Dog food, cat food, all kinds of stuff.
Good. Thank you.
They don't accept donations, which is interesting. I was, going to donate some canned goods that I have that I don't like. And they said, no, we can't take donations. It has to come from the All Faiths place.
All right, thank you, Amy. Or Grace, I'm sorry. Betsy, you have your hand raised.
Before I say what I had initially wanted to say, we had at St. Boniface a year-round donation center, and then when the barrels got full, we would call All Faiths Food Bank and they'd come pick them up. And then when COVID hit, they closed that program down. And the last I had heard, they were not accepting, they have a technical term for it, but it's just, donations from you and me. So
Right.
I'm hoping they will start that up again soon, because I know many of us would love to be able to drop something off, can go to whatever, and you feel a little bit more connection if you have bought something specifically and then donated it versus, writing a check. But
Exactly. Yeah, I wanted to do it too, and they said no.
yeah. Tom, as I'm listening to you, I am reminded very much of something I heard eons ago, that true ministry in the world happens where the world's great need and your great joy intersect. And I just see that so alive in what you're saying. And there's a need out there, and your joy is just drawn to it. So I
just love going to hospital. I love it. It's,
that's neat.
hospice was difficult. I'll admit that. When I volunteered at hospice and I was there 10 years, hospice was tough. I didn't really enjoy going there. I went because I knew they had a great need, but I can't say I enjoyed it. And after 10 years, it was okay, out of here now.
Right.
And again, I think, serving as a volunteer depends on your intention and your motivation. I know some people go just to get out of the house. It seems like a spiritual waste to me. It's like, have a spiritual intention. Say that little prayer, God help me to bring some comfort and peace and calmness to people today, whatever you could do.
Thank you, Tom. And Betsy, the person you were quoting was Frederick Buechner on Where Our Passions Meet the Needs of the World. And we have 3 hands raised, so either Michael or Rita.
I'll just do this real quick about All Faiths Food Bank. Actually, they would prefer checks and money donations because they can buy more with their money than if we give them individual cans of stuff. So just as a reminder. And just one other thing, those of you who have called St. Boniface on a Monday morning, the voice you hear is the friendly Father Tom Kearney. Bye.
That's right. Yep. It's amazing how much food we have. I wish you could stop by someday and look at it. It's a huge room and it's just full of all kinds of food. And usually after the 2 hours go by, the 2.5 hours, it's 95% gone.
Thank you. Ron, you have your hand up.
Thank you. I want to go back to the spirituality of everybody on this screen I know has volunteered. Super volunteer Betsy. And why do we do it? I think because to me, it's an act of love.
Mm-hmm.
It's the love to give and the love to receive. And my fulfillment is that I just, on Wednesday, I met with the principal of Booker and said, it's time that I close out my volunteering at Booker. I've helped students with their writing for 17 years at Booker.
Wow.
And so the reward, it keeps coming. As Tom said, the students will contact me and thank me or ask me to do something else and so on. Because with writing, you get into their heads and then they get into your heart. The reward is that simple thank you. And I know you share with me that the importance of that thank you, it almost goes right into your heart. It fills your heart. And that's my reason. It's an act of love on my part, but my reward is that simple thank you. That's my spirituality.
I agree. The other thing is, I guess maybe because of my Catholic upbringing, but as I look back over my life, there's a lot of things that I regret. There's mistakes you make, there's failings you have, there's opportunities you didn't take advantage of. So there's a certain amount of metanoia or repentance in doing that work. And I think that's an important part of it.
Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
Let's see. Or Vince.
Thank you. I'm glad you said what you said, Tom, and I'm glad you said what you said, Ron, because it just this is a group of people, and maybe that's why we were so drawn to listen to you this morning, Tom, is that this is an act of stewardship, sharing our gift of time and talent. And it's I think it's one of the things, Vincent, I love so much about St. Boniface is how enthusiastically people give of themselves, not only in parish life, but out in the community. It's like people have two lives. And what I'm going to ask may sound negative, but I don't mean it to. At some time, I think we've all found ourselves in a volunteer position, and for whatever reason, we've been doing it too long. The role subtly shifts, the community subtly shifts, and suddenly that joy that we used to find is no longer there. And I have heard it said conversely to Frederick Buechner, his words that if that connection isn't happening anymore, it's not a ministry, and it's time for you to go find where that connection can happen again. So all of it is a long-winded way of saying, how do you know when it may be time, as you did with hospice, to say no to hospice so you can say yes to something else?
Right.
And I'll quit talking now.
I think, Betsy, when you go home at the end of your shift and you feel like you really didn't contribute, or you don't feel that there's a spiritual feedback or fulfillment. For example, at hospice, during the 10 years I was there, I enjoyed feeding patients. I enjoyed going shopping for the hospice house, get their food. Believe it or not, they would send me to CVS, get all the drugs that they needed for the house. Can't believe they ever did that, but they did. Helping the staff physically care for the patients. But then over the years, you know how the government is and standards are and organizations, oversight, things began to change. So then you couldn't cook for the patients anymore, and you couldn't feed the patients anymore, and you didn't go get the drugs from the drugstore anymore. So the duties and the things that you did there that I found fulfillment in began to get less and less and less. And of course, every day in hospice, you were dealing with the heaviness of the place. It's not a happy place. And so it just got like scales were like that. You know what I mean? The feedback versus what it took out of you to go there. I said, I'll concentrate on the hospital.
All right, thank you, Tom.
Mhm.
Betsy, your question about how do you know when it's time to change? The other aspect I'd add in there is that when you're no longer energized by what you're doing, I had the opportunity, I'm retired from it now, but I had the opportunity for 25 years to serve as a volunteer chaplain, CPE trained chaplain. And it's amazed me that, I could work a full day at the laboratory and then go on duty for 4 or 5 hours that evening. And plus I was on call at night with the trauma team. And I would go in and be energized when I left at the end of the day. And I think that's one of the things I looked at as well. And I'm hoping I still hope at some point, I've tried to get it going and it didn't go anywhere, but that the Episcopal Church would put together a certification program for volunteer chaplains, that they would, utilizing the clinical pastoral education, at least one unit's required for all deacons or priests in their process, but to have a program where a hospital knows that they can get people who have been certified and trained. And the hospitals are nervous, they don't know. And as Tom has pointed out, you get people coming in. I mean, a chaplain sets aside their own agenda. It's the agenda of the patient you're going to see. And you have people who go in with their own agenda and I ran into it of, if this person doesn't want to be saved, I'm not going to bother with them, and that's not what chaplains are there for. So I'm hoping at some point we can come up with a program of certification that will help hospitals relax and invite chaplains in. The last hospital I was with was just a small one, 200-bed hospital. And there were 5 of us who were CPE trained volunteer chaplains, and we provided 24/7 coverage. And as I said, I was on the trauma team as well. And it's a wonderful ministry, but again, hospitals are nervous about sending people out to visit. So Tom, we don't have any more hands being raised, but I just want to thank you so much for your sharing and for the insights you've given us into your life as a volunteer and your spirituality as a volunteer.
Thank you.
And again, thank you so much.
Okay. I'll tell you about my happiest day there, my happiest duty. And that's on Saturday morning when all the newborn babies go home. And the fathers come in, with the thing they put the baby in, and we go up to the mother baby unit. And mommy and baby get in the wheelchair, and daddy's there and taking all the stuff, and we're taking the baby out. And of course, I make a big fuss about the baby, how gorgeous and beautiful and all that. But it's really a happy moment. And I look forward to it every Saturday morning, watching those little Sarasota citizens go home. And our hospital is amazing because our NICU, the newborn intensive care unit, often has 30 babies in there, 28, 30 babies, because they bring them from all over the place. And I guess we're one of the few NICUs around. But it's a lot of fun watching those kids go home. I saw a guy not too long ago, Saturday morning, he come walking in the main lobby, and he had a stroller he was pushing, to a double stroller for twins, and he had one on his arm. And I said to him, "Did you?" And he said, "Yep, triplets." 3 girls, amazing. Yeah, so there's a lot of fun there too, and there's a lot of laughs and smiles at that place. Thank you, John.
Thank you. And Mike, you've got your hand up. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I just want to thank Tom for this wonderful presentation, and the participation of everyone here was so energetic and involved. I just had a comment to what you said about the certification process. I wondered if St. Stephen Ministry, that we've had many people trained in our church, and I think it's somewhat active. I'm not sure how active, would be a kind of a vehicle for lay people to interact with people in, because there is training required, and it's not necessarily faith-based, but it's like reacting to the patient or the client as they are, just as you said.
I think it can form a good base for someone coming in, but serving in the hospital itself has different requirements that Stephen, so it had to be something in addition to the Stevens ministry, but definitely Stevens ministry provides a great base for meeting and listening, the deep listening that's involved. And a large part of what the chaplain, or what we call our ministers of care, these are our non-chaplain volunteers, is listening and praying with the patient. And yeah, it's a possibility. It's just that the situation is that hospitals themselves aren't going to do that. They need to have a different venue for bringing people in that are trained, that they can be comfortable with. And
Mike, when I told the volunteer office, the director, that I wouldn't be in today to work my Saturday morning shift, I told her about our presentation here, what I was going to speak about. And she made a very strong point saying, "Oh, please don't recruit chaplains, because we don't want volunteer chaplains. We want professional chaplains." They have 3 at the hospital. I remember when I started, they were very clear in telling me, you're here as a volunteer, not as a priest. And I think they probably told Father Ernie the same, but I'm not sure. But I know, like John says, we're leery about having unprofessional, chaplains running around the hospital corridors.
And in our program where we have volunteers who are ministers of care, and they go through an extensive training, that a large part of it is what CPE training is involved as well, that they can recognize what hat they're wearing, because we've we've got nursing staff, for instance, that volunteer as ministers of care. And they have to recognize they take off their nurse's cap when they're there because they're not there to look at the medical aspects of caring for the patient. They're there to take care of the spiritual aspects of that patient's needs. So it's part of recognizing what hat you're wearing.
Perhaps it's the Stephen ministers are more adapt to outside the hospital setting, and but maybe people are more familiar with the program and how active St. Stephen ministers are. I'm not. I didn't follow it. I don't know, but someone could maybe input on that.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's lots and lots of opportunities outside of the hospital to minister to people. Absolutely. Years ago, a clergy person could go into the hospital or go into the clergy room, and they'd have a list of all the Catholics who were there, all the Episcopalians who were there, all the Jews who were there. None of that anymore. People will sometimes say, I was in the hospital, you didn't come visit me. It's like, well, we didn't know you were there. And we have no way of knowing because of that HIPAA stuff.
Right.
You don't tell people, that Mary's in the hospital, they're not going to visit her.
Now that has been a major problem. And as a chaplain, I couldn't, even local clergy that I knew, I could not just say to them, you have so-and-so from your congregation in the hospital. I would ask the patient if they'd like me to let their pastor know that they're there. And if you get that yes, then you're clear to do it. But otherwise, by law, you're not allowed to say anything, unfortunately. All right, I don't see any other hands up. Again, Mike, Tom, thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all for listening to me. Thank you.
And blessings, everyone. We'll see you
Thank
next.
you, John. Thank you, Denise.
We'll see you in January.
Hey,
Blessings.
bless you. Merry Christmas.